There are stories in the Bible that the tradition has never known quite what to do with. Stories that sit in the text like a stone in the road, hard and immovable, not offering easy consolation, not resolving into clear moral instruction. Stories that preserve something true about human experience precisely because they refuse to make it bearable. The story of Jephthah's daughter is one of them. It is one of the oldest fragments in the book of Judges. It's 11 verses long. The daughter has no name, and it has disturbed readers for more than 2,000 years. We read it today with Theodor Reik, the psychoanalyst who, more than almost any other member of Freud's circle, was preoccupied with the psychological archaeology of myth and ritual, with what ancient stories tell us about the deeper structures of human guilt, obligation, and sacrifice. The story is in Judges 11. Jephthah is the son of Gilead and a prostitute. Driven away by his legitimate brothers, he makes his way to the land of Tob, where he becomes the leader of a band of raiders, an outlaw living outside the social order that rejected him. Then the Ammonites go to war against Israel, and the elders of Gilead come to Jephthah and ask him to lead them. The same people who drove him out now want him back. He negotiates hard. If I win, I am your head. They agree, and Jephthah goes to war. Before the battle, Jephthah makes a vow to the Lord. If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. Jephthah defeats the Ammonites. He comes home. And when he comes home, who comes out of the door of his house to meet him, dancing with tambourines? His daughter, his only child. When he sees her, he tears his clothes and says, You have brought me very low. You have become the source of great trouble to me. I have made a vow to the Lord, and I cannot take it back. And she, and this is one of the details that makes the story so unbearable, does not ask him to take it back. She asks only for 2 months to go into the hills with her friends to weep over her virginity, to lament what will not be. And at the end of the 2 months, she returns to her father, who does with her as he had vowed. The text then tells us that it becomes a custom in Israel for the young women to go and mourn the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite 4 days a year. Theodor Reik devoted much of his career to the question of what he called the psychology of the vow. His work in Myth and Guilt, which we discussed in our episode on Cain and Abel, was particularly interested in how human beings use the mechanism of this solemn promise as a way of negotiating with forces that are felt to be larger than themselves, and what happens when the negotiation goes wrong. The vow, in Rake's analysis, is not a straightforward request or a contract in the modern sense. It has a magical structure. It is an attempt to bind the divine, to create an obligation even God cannot easily refuse. The person who makes a vow is saying, I give you this, and in exchange you give me that. The asymmetry of power is acknowledged, but the structure of exchange is insisted upon. I bind myself in order to bind you. This is a very ancient pattern. Rake traced it through anthropology, through comparative religion, through clinical practice. The vow is one of the primary mechanisms by which human beings attempt to establish some measure of control over the uncontrollable, to make a deal with fate, with God, with the future. And the vow always comes with a terrifying danger, because what you offer to give in exchange for what you most want, you may be asked to give. What Jephthah offers is devastatingly imprecise. Whatever comes out of the door of my house. It could have been an animal. The ancient household included animals, and the first creature through the door might have been a goat. It could have been a servant. He does not expect his daughter. Rake would say, and yet, the unconscious logic of the vow is more precise than the conscious intention. Jephthah is a man who has built his entire identity on being the warrior who wins. He has been expelled, rejected, and dismissed. His legitimacy is constituted entirely by his military success. He is given what he values most in exchange for the thing that constitutes his value. What he values most, his only child, his daughter, the continuity of his line, the proof that he exists beyond the battlefield, that is what comes through the door. Reik was deeply interested in the phenomenon of guilt and what he called the return of the repressed in ritual form. One of the insights he returned to repeatedly was this: the things that become ritual, that are repeated annually in a culture, are almost always things that were originally traumatic. The ritual is the community's way of holding the trauma, processing it, making it bearable, giving it form, without either forgetting it or being destroyed by it. The mourning ritual for Jephthah's daughter, 4 days a year, the young women of Israel going into the hills, is a ritual of lament, not for Jephthah, for her, for the unnamed girl who went into the hills for 2 months to weep over what she could not have, and then came back. What she came back to, we are not told exactly. The text says only that he did to her according to his vow. The rabbinical tradition has debated for centuries whether this means she was literally sacrificed or whether the vow was fulfilled by some other means, a life of consecrated virginity perhaps. The text, which is rarely so reticent about difficult details, is here at its most stripped down. He did with her as he had vowed. The ritual of mourning that followed suggests that the women of Israel knew what this meant. You do not mourn annually for something that turned out to be not so bad. What Reik would find most psychologically profound in this story is what happens in the 2 months in the hills. The daughter does not run. She does not appeal to the elders. She does not ask the God who received the vow to release her father from it, though the tradition would later develop extensive mechanisms for the release of vows precisely because of situations like this. She asks for 2 months to go and weep over what she will not have, her virginity, which in the context of the ancient world means her future, her marriage, her children, her continuation. And then she returns. Reik saw in this voluntary return the structure of what he called the acceptance of the sacrificial role, the ancient, pre-rational willingness of the designated person to participate in their own sacrifice. He documented this across many cultures and traditions, and he was careful to say, this is not masochism and it is not a simple submission. It is something stranger and more disturbing, the acceptance by the individual of the logic of the community, even when that logic destroys them. The daughter accepts her father's vow. She mourns what is hers to mourn in her own time, in the hills with her friends, and she comes back. The ritual that follows her death is not imposed on the women of Israel. It is freely undertaken. They go every year to lament. There is a word used for this lamenting in the Hebrew text. It is the word tana, to tell, to commemorate. The women go into the hills to Tana, the daughter of Jephthah, 4 days a year, to tell her story, to keep it alive. Reik understood ritual commemoration of this kind as one of the ways that communities process collective guilt. Because what Jephthah did to his daughter is not simply a personal tragedy, it is something that was done, that the whole community stood by and allowed, that the logic of vow and honor and divine obligation made inevitable. And the annual lament is the community's way of knowing what it knows about itself, that there are structures of obligation that can lead to terrible things, and that the people within those structures bear a responsibility even when they cannot prevent the outcome. The ritual does not fix this. Ritual never fixes the original event, but it holds it. It keeps it visible. It says, we know this happened. We know her name is not in the text. We know she had 2 months in the hills and then came back. We keep the 4 days. Theodor Reik once wrote that guilt which cannot be acknowledged becomes the engine of compulsion. The thing we cannot mourn properly, we are condemned to repeat. But guilt that is met, that is felt, held, expressed in ritual or story of lament, can be transformed into something that does not destroy us, not exonerated, not erased, but metabolized. The lament for Jephthah's daughter is the oldest feminist memorial in the Hebrew Bible. A group of women going into the hills 4 days a year to weep for an unnamed girl who was destroyed by a system she did not choose and could not escape, to name what was lost, to refuse to let the story be simply the story of Jephthah's victory over the Ammonites. She comes out of the door of the house dancing with tambourines. She weeps for what she will not have, and she comes back. And every year, for as long as the custom lasted, the women of Israel went into the hills. They told it, they kept it, and they remembered.